Very good. So, welcome everybody. Welcome. It's great to have you here. Thank you for coming out. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. So we'll start with that. We recognize and honor the current tribes who comprise the Wabanaki Confederacy, the Penobscot, the Passamaquoddy, the Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We respect the traditional values of these tribes and affirm their inherent sovereignty in this territory. We support their efforts for land and water protection and restoration, and for cultural healing and recovery. Thank you. All right, my name is Kathleen Sullivan, and I am the coordinator of FreeportCAN. Last Monday, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, said in response to the just released Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, quote, "We need to change everything, everywhere, all at once. And now, before we run out of time, we are here to do our part in that work. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being brave enough to recognize that life as we know it here in what David Attenborough calls our Garden of Eden is at a dangerous crossroads. Thank you for caring enough about this time of climate breakdown to come out tonight and sit here on those wooden benches with us and consider what we can do together to push us back from the edge. What more important time is there to be alive, to be able to make a difference than right now? What we do now in the next 15 years will matter for thousands of years to come. Your presence here tonight is important to our community, to our oceans, our forests, our plants and animals, to our children and grandchildren. If we dare to make the lifestyle changes that scientists are telling us we need to make, others will follow. Together, we can do this. Freeport can be a model to our other cities and towns. We can lead. If we face this crisis alone, we get very scared, we feel very helpless and ineffective, and turn away. But together, tonight, together, we have more courage and more joy and more hope and more power. So that's my introduction. First, now I'm going to tell you what's going to happen tonight. So the first half of tonight, each one of these three speakers will come up and speak to us about the big picture from the international side to the state side to the picture about what's happening on the municipal level. And the very first, and then we'll take some questions. And then in the second half, I will tell you more about FreeportCAN and the importance of climate action at the level we are working on, what the social scientists call small-scale interactive interventions. I'll tell you about the work we did last year, and I'll introduce you to our team. But before you go home, you've all got those little pieces of paper. We're hoping that you will be inspired by the time you're ready to go home to sign up and tell us what you're interested in and to become part of the work that we're doing here at FreeportCAN. So that's what's going to happen tonight. So the first thing we're going to do now is introduce Susana Hancock. Susana Hancock is Freeport's climate rock star. She is not only Dr. Susana Hancock, but she is an Arctic explorer and researcher, a rower and rowing coach, and somehow Despite all the work she does nationally and internationally, she keeps her feet planted here at home, where she is an integral part of our community and many local organizations, including FreeportCAN and Freeport Sustainability Advisory Board and the schools. We thank you, Suzanne, for all you do for Freeport. And invite you to come speak.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And despite all of that, I'm not used to talking to people I know, so. But I'll start off with this bottle of Martinelli's sparkling cider. So this is a bottle that's 750 milliliters. If this were red wine, it would be 8 standard drinks. So I'm going to ask you a question. The melting of Greenland, if I were to capture the amount that Greenland is melting, how many of these bottles would I fill per second? Per second. How many of these bottles would I fill per second?
10,000?
17 million bottles per second. So that is how much we have currently destabilized the Greenland ice sheet. The Greenland ice sheet is currently the largest source of sea level rise around the world, and we've destabilized it that even if we were to stop all emissions now or last year, it would still contribute an average of 10 inches of global sea level rise. That is just that contribution from Greenland alone. 10 inches is an average. In some areas, it's going to be double that. And those areas where they're going to see that are the areas that are already dealing with exponential sea level rise. So using that as an introduction, Kathleen had asked a little bit about we can go on to the next page. Yeah, onto the IPCC report that came out last week. That's a synthesis report. It's nothing new. It's basically summing up 8,000 pages that have come out in the past 18 months. I was working on about 6,000 of those pages and can tell you that there's a lot there. But you know, the big things are that we're still talking about the exact same thing and we're not seeing that action. If anybody is interested, the synthesis report is still quite long, but it is much more accessible than the individual documents that comprise it. But we know that this report, really the research, we started the finalizing of the writing for these back in 2020. Since then, 21, 22, last year was the highest emissions that we've had to date into the atmosphere. We are 8 years now into the Paris agreements where countries are planning how to go lower, and we are still going higher. The last decade was hotter than it's been in the past 125,000 years. Almost half of the population in the world now, between a little bit more than 3.5 billion people, are living in situations that are so climate vulnerable that their lives and livelihoods are at risk on basically a daily basis. It's not, of course, just people. More than 1 million species are at risk for extinction. And we are coming into an El Nino period, which for many of you may just be known as one of those things that helped instigate the ice storm 25 years ago. So if you're familiar with the El Nino effect for that, it's associated in this context with a generalized warming. So this summer may be quite hot. We're not quite sure when that's going to happen, but it may give us a preview of what 1.5 degrees really looks like. And of course, you know, we have solutions. That's a lot of what this report is about, is those solutions, but it's the acting of those. And we will be talking about the solutions this evening. You can skip that one. I'm going to skip that one. So this graph here is a little bit hard to see, but what you need to know is that it's a map of the world, and it has 16 dots on it. Those 16 dots are tipping points that we are watching. 9 of those tipping dots are polar, which is part of why I think the polar regions are really cool to study, because they're kind of collapsing. There are another 9 that are global in that they may start in one area, or it's permafrost thaw, it's local to a region, but it is affecting the world overall. 7 of them are a little bit more isolated. Of the 16, those 6 are going to be tipped, or we're studying them now to see maybe they're in the process of being tipped. And that means that we're passing a threshold after which that change will become irreversible and self-perpetuating. If you think of something like a game of dominoes, or not a game, what you do when you're supposed to be playing dominoes, when you set them all up and you tip one over and watch them run around. So we are creating this situation, and you can go to the next. All right, these are a couple of my actual images, and they don't show very well because they're testing out. This is definitely a beta version here. But the globe that you can see, if you can see it, has a bunch of red dots on it. And those dots, if you were to actually look at the web I've created for this, you can go to them, and each one has a little story. But those are the sites of climate disasters from around the world from last year. And we're looking, that were all driven in large part by Arctic melt. And so those are both hemispheres and on all continents. So focusing a little bit tonight, I had to focus it on something. So I am focusing on polar regions. They're melting Arctic 4 times faster. Where I do work, it's really like 7 times faster than the world overall. And what we're seeing in the upper right map, if you can see the red spikes, that's the melt of Greenland. And what you're supposed to see is sort of a parabola-ish shape. And what we're seeing with the red is that we are starting to see extreme melts happening in shoulder seasons. So we're not just having a cold season go into warm and back into cold, but we're seeing these shoulder seasons, so the early spring, the late fall, actually having these significant heating events. So for example, a couple weeks ago, at the beginning of this month, it was 90 degrees above normal in certain parts of Greenland. So, where we're having snow, they're having melt. It's not supposed to be that way. And if I were here last year telling you this, I might tell you that in the year before, in 2021, we had 10 climate disasters around the world that hit $1.5 billion. This year, I can tell you that in 2022, we had 10 disasters around the world that hit $3 billion. So we're not always going to have that 100% doubling, but we are going in that direction where climate inaction is significantly taking a toll and much more expensive than any kind of climate action. You can advance, please. Thank you. So going back to this tipping points, it's not just what's happening around the world. As I said, they're global, many of these, but 3 there especially are really driving our climate here. So you can skip again. So just a graphic from a couple years ago from the Press Herald, just on the Gulf of Maine. Probably many of you are familiar living on the Gulf of Maine, that it is warming faster than other bodies of water. There we're seeing invasive species shifting ecosystems, shifting fisheries, phytoplankton that's reduced by about 65% at the base of the food chain, and sea level rise and all sorts of things. So these are really driving us, what's coming on right here. And you can go ahead. Excellent. All right, this is another beta test because this is an app that I'm kind of trying to develop right now. But this is to kind of give you an example of, when we're talking about big global things, what does it actually look like? So I have taken the liberty of making some decisions here because it's a static image of choosing Freeport. So if you were to be able to read what's on the orange there, it is a map of downtown Freeport. And you're going to have to trust me on that. And I have chosen as a source of emitter Portland Jetport, figuring that most of you have flown out of or into Portland Jetport. So the area that is shaded in the middle of that orange graphic is the area that would be melted with all of the emissions generated by Portland Jetport within 1 week. So if we were to go to the Arctic and say, okay, how much Arctic ice would we lose per week because of Portland Jetport? That is how much it is. For those who obviously can't see the streets, that is from about Jameson Tavern to Starbucks as a full circle. So we're losing that per week just from Portland Jetport. So got hundreds of thousands and millions of these around the world. So I think don't think I have another slide after that, but I guess I do. No, that wasn't supposed to be the slide. That was the one where I was trying to get it changed. Okay, you can enjoy random pictures of me. Sorry. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Brian to pick up on some of these local themes, and then Valy, who's on the sustainability board in Freeport, to talk more about what we're doing in town. So thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Okay, Brian Ambrette is up next, and he is the Senior Climate Resilience Coordinator with the Governor's Office of Policy and Innovation, and he is the administrator of the Community Resilience Partnership. So now we're going to learn what the state is doing to respond to this moment. Okay.
Well, good evening. Thank you for having me this evening. It's a pleasure to be here with such distinguished guests. Kathleen graciously gave me about 90 minutes, so I have 50 slides or so to get through, so we better get started. The state is doing an awful lot, and I'm going to just touch the tip of the Greenland iceberg tonight with covering some of the things that we're going through. What you'll see on my slides are a lot of links, and I hope that Kathleen will share the slides with you afterwards so that you can access some of the websites that are tracking the progress that we're making as a state. I do work with the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and the Future, and that's an office that Governor Mills set up in 2019, shortly after she came to office, to be the location where most of her priority issues are addressed and housed, and where we do that work. So in addition to working on climate change, the office works on the opioid epidemic and response, on the Children's Cabinet and the new Cabinet on Aging, on workforce development, and now newly on affordable housing in Maine. So we have all of the big, thick issues here in Maine housed in one office, and we're all really pleased to be able to work on those for the state. Next slide. So I don't need to tell you that the issues of climate change are urgent. This is a quote from the UN IPCC calling climate change a code red for humanity. We just heard a lot about why there's so much urgency around this, and so I just wanted to hop to the next slide and say that this is a very high priority for Governor Mills. She campaigned on this twice and is now in the process of putting a lot of resources and a lot of effort into backing up those words on her campaign trail. Next slide. So because of that, we have a number of really important goals that were set by Governor Mills and have been enacted into law. So we have targets for reducing our emissions 45% below 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% below 1990 levels by 2050. We have a carbon neutrality goal. And we also have a goal for making the people, the industries, and the communities in Maine resilient to the impacts of climate change. Next slide. So this is the cover of our state's climate action plan released back in 2020. So we're now 2 years into implementing this plan, and I'm going to work through with you just a few of the successes that we've had so far. If you would just tap the next. Great. So this is what I'm going to cover tonight. I'm going to talk to you a bit about the tracking dashboard that we've set up so that you can see the progress on all of the goals that were set in the state's climate action plan. I'll talk a bit about the Community Resilience Partnership, which is a new program that Freeport's participating in that helps communities take steps that are aligned with the state's climate action plan. And then I'll talk a bit about the federal funding that's landing here in Maine through several different programs and helping us take some really big steps forward. Next slide. So if you're familiar at all with the state's climate action plan, this slide is not a surprise to you, but these are the 8 strategy areas, the big pieces that we're working on in the state's climate action plan. And since the font is pretty small up there, I'll let you know that the first one is around the future of transportation, both in electrifying our transportation and also in alternatives to single occupancy vehicles. The second is modernizing the buildings in Maine to be more energy efficient and to be fully electric. The third is reducing carbon through renewable energy and creating good jobs around that. The next couple are around protecting the environment and protecting heritage industries in Maine. The next 2, strategies F and G, are around building healthy and resilient communities and climate-ready infrastructure. And then the last one is really important. It's around engaging people in Maine in both in the stories about how climate change is impacting here in Maine, and also about the solutions, how people, how communities, how businesses, and other institutions can participate in the solutions. Next slide. So this is the high-level dashboard that we're maintaining for publicly displaying and being transparent about our progress towards the goals. Each of those 8 areas on the previous slide had several targets and goals underneath them that we're diligently working towards. And this dashboard is an effort to be actively and regularly communicating with the people of Maine how we're doing against that plan and the goals that we set. So the website here for this dashboard is maine.gov/climateplan/dashboard. It is tracking us numerically against some of the targets that we've set. So the next couple of slides, I will dig into these numbers a little bit. Next slide. There's also on the same website, there is an interactive map where you can go and see how the projects and the funding are landing in communities across the state. You can zoom in on Freeport, or you can zoom in on Caribou and see what's happening in each of these communities. And we update this map fairly regularly so that you'll see new activities coming online. Next slide. So the big important metric is how we're doing against our statewide greenhouse gas emissions. There's a report released by the Department of Environmental Protection every 2 years that tracks how the state's emissions are going. The good news is, as of the last report, which came out last year, and the information is always a little bit old, so last year's report reported up to the 2-year period ending in 2019, is that our emissions are 25% below 1990 levels. That's the good news. That report serves as the baseline for our climate action plan, since the plan went into effect in 2020. So the next report that comes out will cover the period from 2020 to 2022, and we'll get a first shot or a first glance at how we're doing early on in the implementation of the plan. That update in the last report continued to show that transportation, it makes up our highest source of emissions at almost half of our emissions. Next slide. The good news there is that electric vehicles continue to grow in Maine. It's still a small slice of the pie overall, but it's growing rather rapidly. And so is electric vehicle charging, if you go to the next slide. So we do have charging stations coming online across the state. More and more fast chargers are coming online in the farther flung portions of the state. Level 2 charging is creeping up all around towns in Maine. There is a considerable amount of federal funding coming to the state for new EV charging infrastructure. And the state has one of the nation's first electric vehicle charging plans that will guide where those investments go so that it's equitable, it's supporting travel and tourism and residents travel along the major routes, but also in destinations in smaller towns. So we're really pleased that we're going to be taking advantage of this federal funding, and we have a really solid plan to put that in place. Next slide. Heat pumps are Maine's really, crowning glory. We're often in the national press about the advances we've made in adopting heat pumps, both residentially and commercially across the state. We have a target of installing 100,000 heat pumps by 2025. As of the end of last year, we had done 82,000 heat pumps. So we're well on our way to that target, and we're thinking about what the next target looks like. Incidentally, heat pumps had a big success in our cold snap back in January. Everybody thought that heat pumps were going to shut off when it got down below 10 or 15 or 20 degrees. We talked with an installer a couple of weeks ago who had a service team on call, ready in advance of that event. They got 0 calls. Actually, they got 1 call, and it was from a woman who lived down the street and said how much she enjoyed having her heat pump running while it was 15 or 20 below 0 out. So heat pumps do really well in cold weather, and the snap a couple of weeks ago proved that for us. Next slide. All right, the Community Resilience Partnership is one of those initiatives that the governor has really leaned into and put resources behind. It's a program that I help run out of our office that helps communities through grants and through assistance take steps, make plans, and implement on those plans actions that align with the state's climate action plan. There is a list on our website of 72 eligible activities that a community can apply for with no matching requirement and get a grant and go out and do those. They range from installing EV charging to building efficiency through heat pumps and weatherization for municipal buildings, all the way to conducting vulnerability assessments, understanding how climate change is going to impact their community and preparing the community to be more resilient. We set a goal of having 100 communities participate in that program in the first year, and we cracked it with 127. We're now up to 138 communities participating in the program. We have 93 who are fully enrolled and eligible to take advantage of grants. We have another 40 or so who are doing the prep work, making some plans, and identifying their early practices, early projects to pursue grant funding for. So we're super excited about this program. We're approaching a quarter of the communities in the state that are participating, which is really great for a little over a year in. And it's really fantastic to see the types of projects that communities are engaging in through the grants. Next slide. So the partnership offers two types of grants. One is to communities to do those projects that I talk about, and the next slide will show some examples of those projects. The second type of grant is for service provider organizations, for communities that need a little bit more help to get started, to understand either the science or the impacts or the options that are available to them. Those service providers can be there to help communities get started and to help them apply for their first couple of grants. Next slide. So last fall, we funded 55 projects, or projects in 55 communities across the state in our second grant round. This list here talks about solar projects, about heat pump projects in municipal buildings, about energy audits and energy plans, about electric vehicle charging, about comprehensive climate action plans, and I've highlighted Freeport and Yarmouth there because that's what they're doing with their grant. The two towns got together and said, we're going to hire a shared sustainability coordinator to help our towns do comprehensive climate action planning. And so I've heard that coordinator has started and that the two towns are underway with their planning process. Other projects around drinking water supply and infrastructure, around vulnerable infrastructure, and that all-important category of outreach, vulnerable populations, and youth engagement. All grants that we funded in the round that closed last fall, and those grants are underway as we speak now. Next slide. All right, so federal funding is landing here in Maine every day. The first tranche of that came in the form of the American Rescue Plan Act, right as we were in the heart of the pandemic. In Maine, these funds are being deployed through the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan. Maine was among the 4 fastest states to fully allocate and get the money on the ground for the American Rescue Plan Act, and that's thanks in part due to a number of important planning exercises that were underway or completed or took place during the pandemic. Those include the 10-year economic plan for the state, the Maine Won't Wait Climate Action Plan, and the Governor's Economic Recovery Committee, which did a lot of really heavy lifting during the pandemic to look across all of those plans and see where we could make investments that will help the state bounce back from the pandemic better and set us up to be in the great shape that we are today. An example of the funding that came out of the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan is the Maine Infrastructure Adaptation Fund. This is a fund that was capitalized with $20 million to support infrastructure improvements around the state that take climate change into consideration in the project design, right? So if we know we've got a wastewater system that is flooding more frequently or is vulnerable to sea level rise, the applicants took those projections of sea level rise or precipitation into the design of those projects and will be making improvements according to those projections. We depleted all $20 million of that fund quite quickly, and so we're hoping that there's an opportunity for the legislature to recapitalize it in the next budget. Next slide. The next source of funding was the bipartisan infrastructure law that Congress passed about 2 years ago now. That funding is starting to arrive here in Maine. Our office is tasked with making sure that the state takes advantage of as many of those funding opportunities as possible, maximizing the number of dollars that come into the state. and making sure that those dollars are targeted towards priorities like climate change, like housing, and some of the other issues. And so we have a website here, maine.gov/BIL, and it's meant to be a guide for state agencies, for communities, to understand what federal funding programs are under the BIL, what categories they fit in, such as transportation, resilience in the environment, energy programs and building efficiency, and broadband and technology, and how communities can take advantage of those funding opportunities. Next slide. This is the last one I'll cover. This is the Inflation Reduction Act, passed last year by Congress, which has $370 billion for climate and energy across the country, with the goal of reducing national greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030. And there are a lot of programs in this, many of which are still being designed by the federal agencies and that we're learning about almost daily or weekly at this point. So a couple of examples of programs that are landing here in Maine. The Energy Efficiency Community Block Grant is funding to the state and to communities to do energy efficiency improvements in communities, mostly around municipal buildings or planning or that kind of thing. Two acronyms here, the HOMES and HERA funds, which is for weatherization and heat pump projects in low-income households. The energy efficient home improvement tax credits, which will provide tax credits to folks like you, homeowners and residents, for projects to improve exterior doors, windows, insulation, heat pumps, heat pump water heaters. You can get a tax credit for up to 30%. For those projects, and you can combine that with Efficiency Maine rebates. So there's some really good opportunities to do climate-ready home improvements. It continues the 30% tax credit for solar, for battery storage, and more. Municipalities can take advantage of that tax credit and get a direct pay option where previously municipalities weren't able to take advantage of tax credits. And then, of course, you've probably heard that the electric vehicle rebates are there. Still learning exactly how those rebates are going to land in Maine, which cars will be available, but a lot of really game-changing initiatives here under the Inflation Reduction Act. There's many more programs coming through the Inflation Reduction Act. As I said, we're still learning about those opportunities. Next slide. So that's it, all 55 slides in 90 minutes. If you have any questions about any of this, you can reach out to me, my office, or the Governor's Energy Office. And this information, I'm sure, will be shared with you all after the presentation tonight. So thank you very much. I look forward to the rest of our conversation tonight.
Thank you. All right, so the next thing next person we're going to hear from is somebody you all know well, and that's Valy Steverlynck. Is that right? Did I say it? Oh, did it? You all know Valy from watching her walk around town. I walked with her once. It's really, you gotta just really be in great shape. And she is with, as you know, Freeport Sustainability Advisory Board, and they are working with GPCOG, which is the Greater Portland Council of Governments, on what Brian was talking about, this resiliency grant that they've gotten, community resilience grant, to study, and she'll tell you all about it in a minute, just things we can do here in Freeport at the municipal level. And they're just starting that. It's a year-long program, and Mandy's here too, who's the other co-chair of the Sustainability Board, to answer some questions later about it. But now we're going to find out about what's going to be happening in this town this year. That's really very exciting. Okay.
So thank you, Brian, for making that great introduction. And it was really comforting to know that a lot of the things that Brian was describing are things that Freeport is taking advantage of. So starting with the grant that he described for the GOPE fund, which is the one about the community partnership. And that is the grant that, together with Yarmouth, Freeport applied for successfully, and we got the grant. So we have a new sustainability coordinator coming on board on the 1st of May, which we're really excited about. So thank you. So another grant that we were able to capitalize on was the one for the Climate Action Plan that Kathleen described, and that is the one that GPCOG is helping us out with. So they are our consultant for this project, and as Kathleen said, it's a one-year-long project that we have embarked on last fall. We hope to finish it by this fall, and we're right now in the phase where we're collecting all the data, all the information to establish current greenhouse gas baseline emissions for the town, and also to assess the impact of climate change along the coast in Freeport and in low-lying areas such as marshes and other vulnerable areas. So all that information will be presented to the residents of Freeport on May 15th. There'll be a workshop at the community center. We will have GPCOG here. They will bring all their experts, present all the information to all of us, and they will be hoping to get great attendance so that we, the residents of Freeport, can respond to the data that they present to us, either by corroborating what they show that will happen based on their modeling, also just get feedback to find out which areas people would like to focus on, help them draft the plan so that we have the appropriate action steps that we would like to further as the work to prioritize in this town. We will also be giving feedback to the experts on how far we want to go with reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions. So basically, we will have a menu of options starting with follow the Maine won't wait targets, or whether we want to be a little more aggressive than they are, or whether we want to be a little less aggressive. And I hope that we will be either on par or a little more aggressive. Because as we heard from Susana, there's plenty of work to do, and I think we can do it. So that's all that will be happening on the 15th. It's going to be a pretty jam-packed workshop in terms of data that will be released and feedback that we will hope to gather from all of you. So if you can just put that on your calendars for the 15th, that would be great. There is information out there on the Climate Action Plan itself, and hopefully you guys can just bring a brochure home and peruse, and they also have a really great climate action website that GPCOG designed for us as our consultant. It has a lot of great information about current sea level rise in our area, current temperature change rise in our area, also already areas that have been identified as being very vulnerable. So there's information that is really relevant to our town and that will inform how we decide to move forward. So it's a really good resource if you want to go and browse through it. They also have a button where you can respond to some questions and give feedback that you already may have about what your concerns are about areas that are vulnerable that you have seen. I mean, just last fall we had really high level storm that flooded areas that I had never seen flooded, such as the harbor. I mean, the parking in the harbor was flooded. I was there and I had water up to my ankles. It was remarkable. So things like that are happening faster than we thought they would happen. So we want to hear from people who have seen water rise higher than the models show, who have homes on the water and are concerned about what's going to happen to their homes, who recreate at Winslow Park and are concerned about the boat ramp or the coast and the erosion that's happening there. So it will be a great opportunity for us to basically come together and voice our concerns and get some support from each other, but also inform how we move forward. Aside from the Climate Action Plan, the town a couple of years ago started with the Downtown Visioning Plan. And I'm very happy to report that a lot of the priority areas that were identified as the areas that we want to implement first are very closely tied to sustainability and the adverse impact of climate change in town. And our board has been assigned to further, one is the Climate Action Plan, another goal is climate impact resilience plan, so it's like an emergency type plan. So the staff at Town Hall are basically rewriting their emergency plan, and that is something that will be posted on the website, and I would think pretty soon that people can access, sign up to get messages from the town when there's an emergency on what to do or how they can access help, or if they need help, how they can contact the town to get that help. The other two that we are in charge of are the EV charging. And it was great to hear about all the new funding that's coming down to communities in Maine to basically install more EV chargers. And I would like to let everyone know that the town has applied for grants to install level 2 chargers in the municipal lots. So we're still in the process of writing the application. Hopefully we will have success with that, and soon you will be able to see level 2 chargers installed in town. There's another round of grants that is for level 3, which are the fast chargers. Those, unfortunately, they're still beyond our reach, even with the help that we would get from the federal government, because we are working on several projects that we want to move along with. So we're trying to create partnerships with third parties to hopefully advance that, if not this year, in the future. So I think that pretty much covers the basics, Mandy. Anything else that I'm forgetting? No, okay. Well, I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. So we'll be here to answer questions. Oh yes, there's something really important that I did forget. There is a sign-up sheet for volunteers to help us staff tables in preparation of the workshop on the 15th. We want to be able to bring as many people to the workshop as we can from as many different groups. So we're trying to have tables like the one we have here at different events throughout the spring so that we can get the word out, and because there are only 7 of us, and we can split in a million directions all the time. And we have families and jobs too. We're hoping the community will step up and help us staff some of these tables so that all of you who are not here listening to what I'm saying now can still learn about what's happening and still contribute their invaluable feedback. So thank you so much for being here and for helping us out.
So now we'll take some questions before this group.
John, can you grab that microphone on the floor?
Good, all right, okay.
You gotta turn it on.
I have to turn it on. All right. Does anybody have a question?
Does anybody have a question?
Are we sure? Yeah, we are. So this is for Brian and Valy. The question that I have kind of relates to what you mentioned, Winslow Park being vulnerable and a bunch of other places in Maine, connections and communities. There are, as I believe, a number of, recreational opportunities for different kinds of non-single occupancy travel. And so I'm wondering if the state of Maine or Freeport and Yarmouth are thinking about expanding what kind of transport opportunities and options there are, as opposed to just roads and cars, because that seems to be the, based on that, pie chart, transport is a very significant part of the overall emissions in the state, so that would be a natural place to cut down and make a big dent. So I'm wondering what that looks like.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So there's a number of things that are underway. I mean, vehicle electrification is one of them, and you hit the nail on the head that we can't just focus on single occupancy vehicles. And so, really a simple one is the Go Maine program run by the Department of Transportation, which helps carpoolers find other carpoolers and vehicles. So that's a small piece, thinking about the kind of behavior change. There's some important decisions that communities in the state can make around land use and around where we're siting our development and our transportation hubs, and really thinking about different modes of transportation and being able to connect people to those different modes. And so I think these are long-range types of decisions, ones that require behavior change on the part of the users, of the providers, and of the people making policy. And so naturally, those are going to be harder decisions to work our ways through as a state and as communities. But it's important. And it's important because Maine, as we all know, is a rural state. By some measures, it's the most rural state in the country if you look at it in terms of miles of roadway per resident in the state. And so we have a big challenge about how to get people to and from the places they need to get to when we have a dispersed population. It's a little bit different here in Freeport. I live in Portland, where we have really greater opportunities to do different things with our transit systems. But as you get out into some of the other parts of the state, it becomes a real challenge, but also a real need. We know that people who need to travel long distances to get to school, to get to hospitals, to work, to grocery stores. We need better solutions for them. And so the solutions that we get to, that will have a climate benefit will also have a quality of life improvement for people and helping them get to the places where they need to be. And then lastly, thinking about broadband, helping people not have to get to the physical place where they need to be, but to be able to do some of the things, whether it's working or going to school or telehealth, being able to meet those needs without having to get into a vehicle to do it. That leads to quality of life improvements in many ways too. And so all of these options are on the table. The Maine Climate Council looked at a number of them in the first iteration of the climate plan. We are just getting ourselves prepared to come back and do the 4-year update to that plan. And I know that land use and transit and broadband will feature in that plan as well. So it's a really good point. I really appreciate the question. And there's definitely more work to be done at the state level and at the local level as well.
Sorry, on the local level, I wanted to also add, springtime is a time when the town council is always looking at all the expenditures of the town. The breeze and the train are always discussed this time of the year, so it never hurts to send a letter saying we support public transportation. So that's something you can do locally. The other thing that is happening in town is Complete Streets, as part of the downtown visioning, is trying to expand the bike paths all over town. So you will see that the 2 bridges over the highway are now being redone, and they will include a really nice bike path that we hope to, over the years, expand over along 136, down Desert Road, down to Hunter Road to get to the fields. So that's another thing that if you support, it's the town council who makes the decisions. There's funding that comes from the Department of Transportation that we can always access. But a lot of these expenditures fall in the municipal budget. So your priorities are our priorities, and the town council does respond to community and what we express as what we think should be prioritized. So thank you.
So Brian, the other 3 people know where I live and know who I am, but you don't, so that makes you fair game. Thank you for coming. It's really wonderful to have you here, and congratulations on your great work. I'm wondering what the lessons are learned from the heat pump examples that you've given that you might pull through and give examples of for Maine's fishers, foresters, and farmers for whom that heat pump value chain maybe doesn't exist, right? So there's been this nice pull through you've executed beautifully with heat pumps. Tougher to do with farmers, foresters, and fishers, right, as we pull all this federal money in through the state. I call it the missing middle. How do we connect it through? So are there examples you can think of or inspirations you're all thinking of that will help replicate that for Maine is still, I wouldn't call it agrarian, but we're not Detroit. We don't make EVs. We make lobster. Well, we eat lobster. We harvest lobster. We grow things. We have a nationally ranked farm here, Wolfneck Farm, $35 million awardee from the federal grant program for climate smart ag. So what are examples that you might give, or what inspiration do you draw from this amazingly executed heat pump program the state's still doing?
Great. I appreciate this question. Thank you. You're going to make me think on my feet a little bit here. So I think step one is thinking about why the heat pump program was successful or is successful. Part of it is, Efficiency Maine's approach to providing enough of an incentive to get enough people started so that there's a little bit of a tidal wave, effect, and you get early adopters who prove that the concept works in houses in Maine. And then more and more people see that the technology works, that the technology saves money, and that there are opportunities, when, say, the heating system in your home needs a major repair, that it might be time to do an upgrade. The nice thing about heat pumps is that they're modular. You can do part of your house at one time and then another part at another. And so all of that conspired to make it a really good success story, combined with the fact that over 60% of the homes in Maine are reliant on heating oil. And that is far and away the most of any state in the country. So we're economically, we have a large incentive both to do heat pumps because they reduce the energy bill, but they also reduce a lot of the volatility in our energy bill. So if this winter was any story, we learned that heat pumps work in cold weather. They help save money. They're as comfortable as the other heating systems, and you're not, you don't have a flame combustion in your basement keeping you warm. So how do we apply that to other solutions? EVs might be the next sort of logical place to look at that. The story around EVs right now is that they're expensive up front, but they have significantly lower operating costs. And so in your EV, there's like 20 moving parts as opposed to 200 or 400 in a gasoline-powered car. So you have far less maintenance. It costs less to fuel your EV. But you do have to get over the upfront sticker cost. I imagine that there'll be opportunities, speaking of our farms, forestries, and fisheries, to be able to tell economic stories like these with the various solutions. Whether it's electric fishing boats and farming equipment, which probably isn't too far away, or opportunities for farmers to take less productive portions of their fields and put up some solar, either to help them with their own energy use on site, or maybe to house or host a community solar project. All of those can provide alternate streams of income to the farmer to help him make improvements to his farming equipment, or do maybe even some best management practices on the land. So you're seeing a lot of the successes around sort of the newer technologies and climate solutions coming online, driven by economics, right? And not so much, in the early adopters, there are people who are believers and who will do this out of the goodness of their heart, and they believe that it's the right thing for the planet and their community. The next wave of people are doing it because the economics make sense and they want to do the right thing by their communities. And then that final wave of getting, a large portion of the population to adopt a number of these solutions is really going to be getting the price points and the economics in line so that it just makes financial sense to them when they have the opportunity to do an improvement.
Maybe one more question, or maybe...
Howdy, Fred Roby. I'm on the board of the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, so it may come as no surprise when I ask a difficult question. The Climate Council, Maine's Climate Council, basically trivialized bicycling by not including it in the action plan. It's not including it in terms of tracking it. It's not including it in terms of acknowledging it as a realistic mode. We know we need to make radical change, and many people see electric bicycles particularly as an expensive bicycle. When you have to spend $3,000 or $4,000 for a bicycle, but if you compare it to what's the average cost now of a car, something like $37,000, so it's pretty small. So the question is, Brian, when is the governor and the legislature and your committees going to acknowledge that bicycling is a real and functional solution that is within our reach. Thank you.
Great, thank you for the question. Yeah, appreciate it, thank you. It's important, right? I can't speak for the governor, I can't speak for the legislature, I can't speak for even the Climate Council about when it's going to do the things that you named. I can turn the challenge back around and say, communities are where this happens, right? And so putting bike lanes in on important routes is a community decision. Supporting local businesses, being able to get their employees to work by bicycle or by other modes of transportation is important. So this is as just as much a local action as it is a state action. And I think in this case, you know, let towns be the where experimentation happens. Let us learn as a state from what towns are doing. And I'm looking forward to seeing those examples bubble up. Thank you.
All right, so I think we've concluded this part. Thank you. I think we've probably concluded this part of the evening, and we want to thank all of these speakers so much for coming tonight and telling us about the bigger picture and the state picture, the big international picture, the state picture, and what's going to be happening here in town on a municipal level. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for the time you took, and you can go home now. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for all the work you're doing. Thank you. We need all of you. Like our group members to come up. And for FreeportCAN, because we're now going to talk to you about the kind of work that we do, which is really around lifestyle changes and around kind of mindset, and ways in which you as an individual can actually do something in terms of everything, everywhere, all at once. This is one of those things. It's what you can do yourself. So this is our gang. And I'll be introducing them to you in a little bit. First, I want to welcome everybody. Good to see you. And I want to tell you just a little bit about FreeportCAN. So, on a cold, very cold, dark winter night 14 months ago, FreeportCAN was born. We're really very young. We didn't know then if anyone in the community would help us grow up, or would leave us alone with all of our worries. But we have been well met by all of you, and we are buoyed by your response. Here in Freeport, we have such incredible talent. We have so many people with so many deep backgrounds in the kinds of things we need to know about: solar equipment and heat pumps, and starting solar community farms and bicycle trails and transportation, and we have a lot of good information and people with a lot of good skills and a lot of good energy to give us here. And we were thrilled that they came out last year. Many people came out to help us last year. So last week, the day after the IPCC report came out, another really important report came out, and it was put out by a group of behavioral scientists from Sweden, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And they looked at 800 studies all across, international studies about what it is that it takes, what it takes for people to make individual climate action changes. And they came to some really surprising results. So you would think maybe it would be education, right? We'll teach you how to do this. We'll tell you that what you really need to do is not mow your lawn so much. We'll tell you that. Do you think that was what resulted in change? That resulted in 3% of the population change. What resulted in 14%, which was the greatest change they could get, is what they called I shouldn't be doing 2 microphones, should I?
Is what they called small-scale interactive interventions yield the highest degree of climate change, 14%. And that's what FreeportCAN is about, small-scale interactive interventions. So basically, if you see me putting a heat pump in my house, and you see your neighbor putting a heat pump in your house, you might put a heat pump in your house. Or if you see me mowing a little less lawn, you might do that. So that's really what we're doing. We're trying to influence each other to do something enormous, which is to change our culture, really. It's how we think about living on this earth right now. So lifestyle, we know what actions we need to take to do that. We need to drive less, we need to fly less, we need to switch to electric vehicles, we need to buy local everything, we need to switch to a plant-based diet, we need to ditch our oil burners, install solar, we need to reduce our consumption of everything. We need to reconsider the word cost from the point of view of the ecosystems of the planet. But do you want to say, well, will this really matter if I do all this? I mean, isn't it the corporations who are supposed to do this? Isn't it be the big bad banks? And isn't it the fossil fuel companies? What will it matter if I do this? There's some really interesting studies that say that the top 10% of the wealthiest people in the world, and that includes almost everybody in Freeport, are responsible for nearly half of all carbon emissions. So if we can reduce those emissions to the European average level, we would reduce global emissions by 30%. That's pretty big. That's pretty enormous. And we're not talking about reducing it to, the poorest state in Africa. This is to just the European average level. Europeans buy less, they travel less. Anyway, so that's what we're here to do, is to think about how we can make a difference. So after our last forum, people signed up online for one of our many action groups, and we'll tell you about what those groups did last year. Now we're hoping for more action groups, and we're hoping you'll even come up with some action groups tonight that we might be able to start. The action groups are all autonomous and coordinated by a steering committee, which is made up of the leads of the working groups. I just sort of wanted to tell you how we work. We're not like top down, we're this way. So I just want to tell you a little bit about some of the groups that, and some of what they did. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what they did last year, and then these wonderful group people who are running groups now are going to tell you about their plans for this year and hopefully seduce you all to get involved with their work. So just let me tell you a little bit about what the food group last year. In February, the town asked us to run a farmer's market. There hadn't been a farmer's market in Freeport for a long time. So we jumped at the chance to support local farmers and locally grown food, which right off the bat reduces enormous amounts of carbon because you don't have to ship it here from Alaska. Instead, you get it out of our seas or out of our fields. And it was Kathy, Heye, and Margaret Morfitt, who, along with a number of other really great people from town, set up a brand new farmer's market within months. And you've got to think that's an incredible job that they did. You have to find the farmers, you've got to find people who grow flowers and people who can blackberries, and you've got to sign them all up, and you've got to get them there. And we did that. They did that. They got 17 farmers, and 300 people came, and the best part about the farmers market, for those of you who came, was the fact we were just coming out of COVID, right? So there we all were together. It was a way to come together, a way to see each other, a way to have fellowship. I sat in the tent most of the summer, and watching people see each other after not having encountered each other for a long time, it was just this magical moment. They would walk up and they would say, "Hello, I haven't seen you in a long time." So it was not only a place for great local food, but it was really a great place for the community to come together. We have a committee called Land and Waters. This is our second committee. Last spring, the Lands and Waters Committee, led then by Jenny Melville and now by Laura Hench, got us on board for No Mow May, a national effort to change the image of the ideal homeowner from a person who mows his lawn into a green golf course perfection to the person who allows the butterflies and the bees and the wildflowers to flourish on large swaths of his or her land. The other sixth thing that the Land and Waters Group did last year was to support the Town Conservation Commission's report, their Conservation Commission's management plan, which suggested, which was clear that they did not think that it was in the best interest of the ecology of Hedgehog Mountain for mountain bike trails to go above, I forget, to be at the summit. Now, why is that an issue that we care about? We care about that because that part of the ecosystem is an important part for birds and animals to be able to, given the fact that climate change is going to make safe habitat for birds and different kinds of birds and animals and plants, scarcer and scarcer. That was a really important place for safe habitat. In addition, I didn't know this, the more soil you dig up, the more carbon you release. Did I know there was carbon in soil? I didn't know that. But there would be a lot of erosion at that top of the mountain, so that would have created some carbon release. But we don't want anybody to think we're up against mountain biking or biking. You know, mountain biking is terrific, just not there. So we really supported what the Conservation Commission's management plan recommended. And to many people's disappointment, they didn't get mountain bikes on the top. But we really hope for more bike trails of all different kinds. I think would be really great to have in town. So last year, the transportation group, this is number 3, and this is really interesting given the questions we were just hearing about what are we going to do about getting people out of cars and how to have a such a car-dependent community. Kim True, who was leading the transportation group last year, did a great job working with Metro Breeze to get them to give us free tickets, to get people to ride the Breeze more. She got the Breeze to create a guide on using the bus system. We put information about that on our website. But you know what? Getting people out of cars and into public transportation, it didn't work much because we love our cars. So we have more work to do on that. And the Transportation System Committee went because, well, it went dormant. But we could use somebody to get back on that transportation committee and lead with bikes. I'd love to see that, Freeport to really lead on bikes. I'd love to see that, and we could really support that. All right, let's see. We have a Consumer Choices Group, which has been led all year by Judy Wood. This group created the Freeport Area Resale, Repair, Recycle Resource Guide, which you can find in the back of the room or on our website. It hosted an event at the Farmers Market promoting Freeport's 6 resale shops. You see this? One of our great resale shops, this shirt. I highly recommend all the really great fashion in the resale stores we have in town. The other thing that the group did was to get, have you all seen the apparel impact bin out on Route 1, by the corner of Route 1 and South Freeport Road? And there's a company called Apparel Impact, and it's a local company, and what it does is to take shoes, clothes, shirts, hats, old sheets, and They mend some of the things, they use some of the fabric for recycle into other things, and what they can't use, they recycle in really thoughtful ways, as opposed to just sticking it all in the dump and hoping that it, I don't know, what does it do when it goes in the dump? Does it rot? I don't know what happens. Anyway, but so they got an apparel impact bin to come out there. So if you have some things that aren't going to be really well recycled at Freeport Community Services, you could take them there. Okay, we had a government affairs working group, and that was led by Mason Morfitt, who is warm and cozy in Florida, and not here right now, but he worked really hard to help support the town council towards getting the half-time sustainability coordinator that we eventually got, and towards getting the state and supported the town council to apply for the state community resiliency grant, which, as you know, we got, and we have Meddy Smith is the name of the new coordinator who'll be coming out and working with the Freeport Sustainability Advisory Board on that action plan. The last committee I want to tell you about was the Solar Energy and Buildings Group. They were originally 2 groups, but it soon became clear that their goals overlapped, so they merged into one. They led a petition to request the town council to adopt a new, more stringent building energy code, which saves more carbon and ensures more energy efficiency than the current energy code. That the town council is going to be holding a public hearing on this on April 4th. They made heat pumps and solar energy household words by preparing and distributing information about the energy reduction and financial benefits of solar panels and heat pumps. Cognizant of issues of equity, and in partnership with the Government Affairs Working Group, they led a campaign to have some of the town's ARPA money used to help low and moderate income people be able to buy heat pumps, hot water heat pumps, and insulation for their homes. That's a program that's all set up. It's all set up now in the town, and you can go on the town website and apply for those funds which are available. And another thing that they're looking at is the town-capped closed landfill that we have right now. The question is, could we put community solar on that? And they're exploring that idea. So I feel like, so that's what those committees have done. There's just 3 or 4 more things I want to tell you about. I feel like a bragging mother up here. I want to tell you all the things they did, but I don't want to, bore you too much with that either. So, because I really want you to know what's going to happen here in the future. So, just a few more things I want to tell you about. That was the first thing. Is some of you came to at the big event on September 25th when we had the big Freeport what did they call it? The Electrify Freeport Expo, and over 300 people came to that. It was part of the annual National Drive Electric Week, a coast-to-coast celebration of electric vehicles. The event featured a ride and drive, electrical vehicles all over the place, the Rivian RT, the Ford F-150, the Lightning, the Tesla. People were driving these and taking a look at them and figuring out how they worked. We had panel discussions with industry experts to explain how EVs worked. We had local solar and heat pump installers provide an overview of how these technologies worked, and panel discussions with some town moderators like John Egan, Melanie Sachs, and Angela King of the Bicycle Coalition of Maine. Then in early February, we had the Energy Fair, sponsored in part by Balsam Realty and by us and Freeport Community Services, to provide do-it-yourself tips to insulate and heat your homes, as well as information about tax credits and rebates. And one last thing I want to tell you about, and that was really well attended. Lots of people from town came, and I think we provided a really good service for helping people get connected again to how they're going to be able to afford to pay for this, because there are so many options now for tax rebates and tax credits for this. Okay, one last but important FreeportCAN effort that I want to report is that FreeportCAN is joined with the Freeport Historical Society's new Indigenous Freeport History Project to explore Freeport's history before colonization. We know that the Native Americans lived here for 10,000 years before we arrived in a totally sustainable way. And then we arrived a couple hundred years ago, and it doesn't look so good. So and it wasn't an accident that the land was lived on and preserved the way it was by the Native Americans. It was because of their way of thinking. It was because of the way they thought about the interconnectedness of all life. So we believe that by getting to understand the nature of the way they lived on this land and really knowing who the spirits are who walk in our woods, we can learn more about how we can live on this land. And the last thing I want to tell you about that happened this year, I'm afraid it has to do with me. And that is that the Freeport Town Council voted last week to make me Citizen of the Year. Now, the reason they did that is because of them. It's because of this work. And it was because of them and all their support for this. It was all of us who did this. I really accepted the award, but I accepted it for all of us and for FreeportCAN and all the work. And what it really meant to me is that this town is ready for all the important things that happened last year in this town, that they would choose this work makes me believe that Freeport is really ready to grapple with what it means to live in 2023 on this land at this time in the most loving, impactful way that we can. So, okay. So before we have one more thing to do before you all tell us about what you've been doing and are going to be doing, and that is to ask the townspeople right here some of the things that they might have done this year. And so I'd be curious to know how many of you installed a heat pump? Look at all those hands. That's a lot of hands. How many of you tried to install a heat pump but couldn't get anybody to come out? Great. So it was fascinating. When we first started doing this, I think people were like, oh, heat pumps, they'll never heat my house. I'll never get hot enough. Within a year, the attitude in the town just flipped. So there's some interesting data. If you can change 25% of the population, you can change the majority of the population. And I think that's part of what happened, that just enough people started using heat pumps that it began to become really popular. How many people came to the farmer's market? Oh, almost all of you. How many people went to thrift shops for clothes or household items and thought about doing that instead of going out and buying a new butter dish? Lots of you, lots of you. How many people mowed their lawn a little less? Really? Really? Woo! All right. Spring's coming. We want to see those wildflowers. Anything else? Anything else you did? Huh? How many people bought an electric vehicle of some kind? Oh my goodness. Very good. How many people have an electric bike? Wow. How many people wish we had more bike trails in town to ride so we could get to town and be safe? Right. So we need to work on that. All right. So, now, finally, ta-da! The first person to come up is going to be Heye, who's going to tell us about the farmer's market, this season's farmer's market. Okay.
Many of you look familiar, I think, from the farmers market, and as you probably know, we've had to find a new site due to the fact that the property is being sold. The first year was successful. We had no complaints. Hopefully you recognize the tomato logo, and you'll see it around town. On the back table, we have some stickers to put on your bike or your baby stroller or your car or whatever you want, but please wear it with pride. We're delighted to see that this year we have almost twice as many people applying for a vendor position than we did last year. Because of that, we've had to find a larger site, and we have just finalized the fact that we'll be in Memorial Park, which is where the cannons are. We might know it better that way. We are very happy to say that we have 5 local farmers from Freeport. We also have Durham, Pownell, Brunswick, and North Yarmouth, as some a little further out than that, but we are very local. If you're wondering how you can help, we are looking to recruit musicians. We have a much quieter site being in Memorial Park, and we would love to have musicians on a regular basis. If you know of anybody, send them our way. We would love you to follow us on social media at Freeport Farmers Market in Maine. That helps us with our sponsors if we can show that we have a real following. Please continue to come shop at our market. And one more thing that we really would like to promote this year, where we have the room, is to promote day tables for nonprofits in town. So you can come and just have a day table, just a one-time thing or as many times as you want, and promote your organization. And what we really like to do is just promote our community. I think that's what the market is about, even more than vegetables and good stuff. So thank you very much.
Wow, that's a lot of farmers. That's really great. Wow. And next, Shirley Russell is going to tell you about a very new program called Eat More Plants. Shirley.
Well, Kathleen Sullivan applied for a grant, and she got it for us. So we have a small grant, and the organization that we received the grant from is a national organization called the Center for Climate and Behavior, and their work is focused on addressing the barriers that prevent people from making desired change, that care about the climate crisis, that want to do something about it, but it's just not happening, like the New Year's resolution type of thing. And so they've really done and gathered a lot of research, and really that can be applied for any effort, but we chose Eat More Plants. Since meat production is one of the major sources of carbon and methane emissions, we thought of promoting plant-based eating, which also means eating less meat, and actually that is a more difficult thing for some people to deal with. I mean, eating behaviors are so deeply rigid within us, I'd have to say. So anyways, we are, and one thing that was also mentioned that I just heard this week is the fastest and most accessible action we as individuals can take towards reducing global warming is changing to a plant-based eating diet primarily. So, I mean, that can start tomorrow. That's not some long technology kind of development thing we're waiting for. And not only can we do it, but our plan is to do it together. Kathleen mentioned that already, and a lot of this research is that behavior change is very dependent on the social group. It could be, your family, your neighbors, your friends, but it's also chosen groups like we are forming with this goal in mind. And for this coming year, we're planning a number of events that will involve, having group cooking sessions, information sharing, recipe sharing. We plan to have potluck dinners, plant-based, at Winslow Park to coincide with the Meeting House Arts Concert Series held there. And also cook-offs with prizes awarded and ongoing recipe sharing, and we'll probably, be continuing to interact online with people through the process. So I just want to mention that the month of April, we're having 2 focus groups, 2 small groups, where this is mentioned on the half-page handout that you probably received already. And one will be on a Saturday, April 8th from 11 to 12:30, and one will be Wednesday, April 12th, 5 to 6:30. And it's really an opportunity to gather information from the community of what your questions, your needs are, what the barriers are for you to make changes, so we can incorporate that into the structure of our plan, as this is a very new project for us. I guess that's it.
And next, Suzanne Watson is going to come and tell us about solar and buildings. She plays a few roles here, right?
Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, my name's Suzanne Watson, and you might be confused about my, perhaps my own personal confusion about who I am and what I do. I am currently the executive director here at Meeting House Arts, but I started 14 months ago, I think we said. 14 months ago, I was in that little group in that room where we gathered. There were probably 20, 25 of us. And with this novel concept in my mind of what we as local citizens together, and that was the most remarkable thing, is we had a group of people who were worried. We were worried about what was going on in the world. We've gotten more worried tonight. But what could we do? And what would really be impactful? And I was extremely skeptical. I'm totally honest about that. I was extremely skeptical about an organization that would operate in a flat manner. There was not a leadership, if you will, although there was, but still, it was really more of an approach in an egalitarian way. And we were invited in that group to sit there and say, what is your novel, what is your idea, what can you do? And I advanced an idea, kind of came to me, because I do energy efficiency in my earlier life. Energy efficiency to me is the first fuel, the fuel that you don't use. But I said, okay, what would I like to do here in Freeport? And I said, I'd like to start a group that would say, let's weatherize low income or even any building in this town, energy efficiency, insulation. How could we do a better job with weatherizing our buildings? Because as you saw earlier, after transportation, it's all about buildings. So I said, all right, well, I'm going to form a group. And it was kind of like, so where do I start? Well, we had support, and I guess that's what I want to impart here, because I have stepped down in my leadership role with what is now called the Buildings or Facilities Group, because we split off the solar and build. We actually formed a dual group with Bob Stevens, who headed up the solar aspects of this, but we did a solar buildings joint committee. But what we need now, not only are people to join these individual committees, but we need new ideas. We need other people who step up and say, I think I would like to do that. Maybe it's bicycle paths, and we take a really much more stronger position on how we do bike paths. Somebody who would say, that's my thing, and that's what I'm going to do in this town of ours. And that's what I can do, that I can have some control over, some power to make a difference. And trust me, this works. I am absolutely floored by, we got a it will be ultimately $75,000 out of this town to do weatherization for low and moderate income homes, as well as support purchase of heat pumps and other types of energy efficiency and renewable energy initiatives. So my job here now is to tell you this organization is not like anyone I've ever been a part of before. It is a true citizens' effort. And I would highly implore folks to come up not only with your own idea, your own committee, and your own effort, to stand here next year and say, I was able to make a difference in this town. And oh, by the way, Freeport is one of the top towns in the state, along with MDI and Norway. We are one of the towns that's actually moving forward, not talking about it, but doing it. And so that's my implore to you, is think about what if you had the ability to say, I'm going to do such and so, what is it? Write it down on these pieces of paper that you've been handed and join the force, because it's us together as a community, as a neighborhood, that will make the difference. Thanks.
Judy Wood will come up next, and she'll be telling us about what the consumer group is going to be doing this year, and maybe trying to get your ideas for what you think the consumer group could be doing this year.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. Yes, I'm Judy Wood, and with the Consumer Choices Action Group. And the consumer group really focuses on trying to limit the climate change impact of all the stuff we buy and use. Because as you've heard tonight, if you include all of the production and manufacture and transportation and then use and disposal of our household goods, it actually comprises about 60% of global climate emissions. And Americans have 5 times the emissions of the world's average person. So getting our consumer habits changed and reducing our consumption is it's essential for slowing climate change. So what we do in the Consumer Choices Group is just to try to raise awareness of the impact, of the importance of our habits, and advocating to buy less, buy resale, buy sustainably, and to minimize our waste. So we've done a lot over the last year, and I'm really proud of everything we've done, from getting textile recycling bins in town to we've created and continue to expand the resale, reuse, recycle guide, and that is a local Freeport area directory for where to buy items resale instead of buying used, where to get them repaired, where can you donate them, where do you recycle them in the end, just to keep them out of the waste stream. And it's all local businesses, and that is a drop in the bucket of what's out there. So we intend to and hope to expand that. This coming year will be continuing trying to raise awareness of fast fashion, which is really buying cheap and disposable clothing, and the climate impact of that. And so we're going to again feature we're lucky to have many local resale shops. So we have an event at the farmers market where we feature those and try to raffle off gift certificates and just try to get people in the habit of thinking first about buying resale before you buy something new. And we are currently working with the Freeport Community Library to develop a library of things. So in the same way that you would check out a book, they will be having a collection of common household things that maybe people wouldn't use frequently, or snowshoes or radon detectors or whatever. And you can check those out now out of the library the way you'd check out a book rather than buying new. They're going to start small, and we'll be working with them to expand that as much as possible. So that will be premiering this spring. And we have lots of other ideas in the works. We hope to have a repair cafe where you could get things repaired, and hopefully learn to repair your own things. And we're in the beginning planning stages of a food waste awareness campaign. So There's lots of work to do, but we're a small group, and so we could really use your help. So if you are interested in learning more, I'll fill in your little sign-up sheet and get in touch. So thank you.
And next, we have Laura Hench, who will be talking about the Lands and Waters Committee.
Thank you, Kathleen. The Lands and Waters Group recognizes that Freeport is special. For many of us, the beauty of Freeport's lands and waters is what drew us here to begin with, and what drives us to protect it in these unprecedented times of climate change. In Freeport's 35 square miles, there are at least 20 miles of designated trails, 25 miles of coastline, and hundreds of acres of open space. I'd like to shout out to Freeport Conservation Trust, another great local organization that has preserved nearly 1,800 acres of land, much of which is accessible to citizens to explore. I hope you get out there and do that. Many of us mentioned in our group of Lands and Waters, we have about 12 or so people who meet over the last 18 months. We noticed that we have been seeing changes in habitats. We are concerned about biodiversity loss, invasive species, pesticide and herbicide use. The Lands and Waters Group acknowledges the role that landowners and land managers play in influencing the health of our ecosystems. This spring and summer and fall, our initiatives are going to be centering on upgrading our yard care practices. Beginning with, as Kathleen mentioned, No Mow May in May, maybe even in April if the grass starts growing fast. We learned last year that according to the EPA, gas-powered lawnmowers and other lawn equipment emit high levels of carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and nitrogen oxides, and produce up to 5% of the nation's air pollution. If you really must mow, please consider replacing your gas-powered lawnmower with a battery-powered one, or better yet, even a push-powered one, a human-powered one. Not mowing also helps pollinator species that have been adversely affected by climate change, and who depend on some of the early flowering species that live in your lawns and never have a chance to grow. What some might consider weeds like dandelions and clover and bluets and violets are actually really important food sources for the pollinators who are just coming out of their winter hibernation. So take the pledge and put away your mower for May. It's one way you can help by doing basically nothing. And this summer, we're planning a series of lectures and hands-on workshops to learn about building a biodiverse and climate-resilient yard. We would love to hear your ideas about possible topics and guest speakers, but some of the things that we have in mind are learning about the climate impacts of lawn care, transforming your lawn into a four-season native oasis, planting for pollinators, learning how to vegetable garden in your own yards, planning for the oncoming droughts and floods that happen with climate change, tackling invasives, increasing carbon sequestration, and enhancing ecosystem resilience to climate change. I know, it's a lot. In the summer and fall, we are also going to host a number of non-traditional garden tours. Rather than having a one-day tour where you pay a lot of money and you go see these beautifully manicured lawns that someone has actually paid somebody else to do and fertilize and herbicide and love it to death, it's going to be a series of visits that you can do to sustainable yard initiatives where you can see some native plantings, some reduced lawn space that people have done, to see people who have put in vegetable gardens perhaps, and who may have planted some pollinator gardens, and get some ideas for yourself. We're looking for volunteers who might have a garden that they know of. Write that down on that little list that we've talked about and let us know. And finally, this fall, we're going to promote our second annual Leave the Leaves campaign. As somebody mentioned earlier, fallen leaves are a very important habitat for overwintering pollinators. Leave the leaves to encourage biodiversity in your yard and reduce carbon emissions. We are especially concerned about the use of gas-powered leaf blowers. We hate them. They cause serious diesel and particulate matter pollution. A more sustainable way of maintaining your leaves on lawns is to rake them, like the old-fashioned raking that we used to do so much. Leave them in place, leave them on top of your garden beds. They actually provide free mulch, so you don't have to buy those plastic bags of mulch. And, or you can mulch mow them using your electric-powered lawnmower. Okay? So through thoughtful protection and environmental stewardship of Freeport's lands and waters, we can reduce emissions, increase carbon uptake, and support resilience of the natural world. And the Lands and Waters Group really hopes that you will join us. Thank you.
See how terrific everybody is? So lastly, Bob Stevens is going to come up and speak representing Mason Morford about what some of the municipal actions that are this organization is going to be thinking about supporting this year.
Thank you, Kathleen. So I'm speaking for Mason Morford tonight, and I was looking at the mission of the Government Affairs Group, and I think Mason created this, and it's to inspire government action that is commensurate with the scale and urgency of the problem. You've heard a lot about what we can do individually. What we're concerned about is what we can, as individuals, help our government to do to deal with the situation that confronts us. We've heard tonight about programs that are available through state and federal funding. This group is helping to look at those programs and devise methods of them being used by our own town government to use that money effectively in aid of not just dealing with the impact of climate change, but hopefully to avoid the continued speed up of the climate change that's occurring. And you've heard about the action that needs to be taken with respect to developing a climate action plan. What we need to do as FreeportCAN is get involved in that process, go to that first meeting on May 15th and every other workshop, learn what we can learn, and convey ideas that we think, based upon what is available for the government to do, to actually do things not just to make the impacts less on us, but to keep some of them from happening, at least as quickly as they're happening. So that's where I think Mason will want this group to put its efforts this year. And that's going to take some new creative thinking that can look at the programs that Brian was talking about, Valy was talking about, and figure out, okay, so how can we use that in Freeport? How can we go to the town council, and why can't we say, look, we need to actually perhaps make a line item for dealing with climate change the same way there's a line item dealing with roads. You know, what is more important in the long run than helping keep what we have, and for ourselves and those that come after us? So the government affairs part of this is we still have a lot of work to do. I think we did some things last year. Mason led a lot. He found programs that other towns and states have and figured out how we could use them. So we need more of that kind of action, and we're looking for more volunteers. So something like that interests you, please help us. Thank you.
So now you know who we are and how we work and what some of our ideas are and what we need from you. So before I end, any questions?
Ready to go home. You've been here a very long time. You've been sitting on those hard seats for a very long time. Thank you. I don't see any questions. We'll stay. Oh, one question. Yes. They're coming with the microphone.
Thank you. So you mentioned there was a lot of funding available. Would that include things that are private businesses as well? So obviously the best thing would be not mowing, right? But what about landscaping businesses that could use like electric mowers because they mow at such a scale? Things like that. Is that the kind of thing that the funding could apply to?
Does anybody know of okay, good. Are you talking about getting funding for electric lawnmowers and leaf blowers and such? We're working with the town right now to think about, as Judy mentioned, getting a library of things. One of the things that we would like to loan out are electric lawnmowers and leaf blowers. And so we're working on that. It's an expenditure, and so that's something that we're hoping to do. Yep.
Yes, one more question here in the back.
For the farmers market, have you considered something in the evening? As someone who works, I cannot attend. I'd love to attend. I look around this room and I think more people might be able to attend, but I'd love to make it more inclusive.
So I couldn't hear that. I'm sorry. I could barely hear it. Don't think Kathy did. Did you hear the question?
Yeah, I told her. So what, evening hours at the market, is that what you're asking about? I don't know that that would be feasible as far as lighting. Also, we have had to get special permission from the Hilton Garden Inn for our vendors to park there, and I'm not sure how they'd feel about that happening in the evening. I think on an early Friday morning, I think it's pretty open, but I'm not sure in the evening how they would take that. But it's something we'll talk about.
I want to add one comment to what Laura was talking about is the idea of the town actually purchasing some equipment that could be used by us rather than all of us going out and buying individual pieces of lawn equipment, for example. That comes right back to government affairs, which means that we have to get enough people to convince the town council to spend some of the money on this. So we're going to need you to go to council meetings, to get in touch with members of the council. So we all have to work together on these. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes. It's coming.
My little brother, who's only a couple of years younger than I am, conducts meetings at the local library. And what he does is he teaches people how to make kayaks. And using that as an example, other people that have talents for do-it-yourself, not necessarily me, but others, if they conducted courses on how to insulate your cellar and do it at the library or someplace that's available, for free, so to speak, would educate people that might otherwise not do it yourself.
That's a great idea. I think that the energy fair that was mentioned earlier, that was held about 6 weeks ago, we had folks there who had like the 10 top things that you can do most impactful to your residents in terms of energy efficiency. And it was like the top best things that you can do. And there were actually people there that talked about the whole building structure, so they taught people about not only how you stuff insulation in, for example, into a chimney gap, but also why that was important and how that affects moisture and so many other issues. So that is sort of how-to. around energy efficiency, I think would be, again, we'll repeat that again at some point in the future, but that was, we had probably 50 people attend that event, and you know, kind of like how-to, a great idea. Yeah, window dressers is another program that we're looking at here for Freeport. It's being done in other, it's been around for about 20 plus years, but they essentially will come into a town like ours, train people how to make these window inserts, which are very effective, and they teach individual homeowners how to do this, and so they can do their own homes, but they also have a proportion, about 30%, where they actually do low-income homes for folks for free. So some of that we're starting to do, but I again welcome other ideas. I think if there are people here who want to have these workshops, this very venue would be a potential place to do that, but also, you know, the library, other places in town. That's a great idea.
Yes, anything we can do to nurture people in town who have these kinds of skills and talents and with this kind of information they want to impart to their neighbors, just let us know, and we can make that happen. Did I see another hand? Yes. We have to make it fun. So you've got to come to our potluck suppers. That's what you have to come to. We're gonna do plant-based potluck suppers, one every Thursday night down at Winslow Park this summer, and that'll be right before the concerts. So that's going to be fun, and so will the event on June 3rd or I think it's 4th, at Winslow at the Mallet Barn. We're going to have a potluck supper there with with music. I agree. It has to be fun. You know, I think coming together like this, it can be not only serious, but awfully joyful. And thank you for that comment. I think it's a great one to end on. I'm going to end on a quote that's a little bit like that. And it's a quote from Rebecca Solnit, who's an essayist, somebody I really love to read. She says, quote, "There's another way to count wealth and abundance. As hope for the future, as safety and public confidence, as emotional well-being, love and friendship and strong social networks, meaningful work and purposeful lives, equality and justice and inclusion." And on that, I say good night.